Well, good morning again. I don't remember when the last time was I was here. I actually think it was here before, I was here before Lucas was here. Quite a while ago. What I don't remember is I don't remember that incredible gymnasium out there for all of the elder folk. I don't know what the kids do here, but I understand that that's supposed to be really quite a place to work out. Well, before I begin, though, I do want to say that much of what I'm sharing has come through my dialogue with a community of elders living in Sebastopol and Point Reyes. And I, in fact, travel up to Sebastopol every Friday to be in dialogue with some of those folks. And two of the primary persons up there are a woman named Alexandra Hart, who was actually is noted as a garment designer from the 1960s. So this Summer of Love, she's actually being feted. Is that the right way to say it? Feted? Held up, celebrated, all over the place. But they're the ones, they're two of the folks that are contributing to this, but yeah. So this comes out of that dialogue. So this isn't all my thinking, it's actually shared community, and that's something that I'll be talking about in a moment, about the power and the need for a dialogic community for elders. But I want to begin with two quotes. The first is by Carl Jung, Swiss psychiatrist and psychosocial spiritual theorist. He said this. He said, "A human being would certainly not grow to be 70 or 80 or 90 years old if this longevity had no meaning for the species to which they belong." A human being would certainly not grow to be 70 or 80 years old if this longevity had no meaning for the species to which they belong. That means that it's just not a matter of the body growing older and the mind hangs on as long as it can. It means that there's something going on in terms of the contribution to the culture. In fact, there are some anthropological arguments today that say that until we had a third generation, that meant until we had grandparents, this species didn't truly become human. The second thing that I want to offer is a paraphrase of a quote by Malcolm Cowley, who is a novelist, a poet, a literary critic. And he said, in my paraphrase, "To enter the country of old age is an entirely new experience, different from what anyone supposes. No one knows that country until they have lived in it and until they have taken out citizenship papers within its terrain." So what I'm here to do this morning is to pull back the curtains, to pry off the lid, to open up an ample passageway into that wild and severely underreported territory, because it offers us a new vision of humanity. And also social, psychological, spiritual, existential, and life-ways possibilities that can powerfully and uniquely assist us in saving the human species and the ecosystems of the planet, which, as you all know, are in deep, deep peril. So I want to read a section of an article on conscious eldering that my fellow co-conspirator, this Point Reyes Chinese-American man named Bing Gong, wrote for the newspaper up there. He said, "In the longevity revolution, people are living 20 to 30 years beyond retirement age. Pre-boomers born in the 1930s through 1944 and baby boomers from 1945 to 1964 are becoming a demographic force as a majority of an aging population. There is a growing movement of conscious elders that will change the stereotypes of older people. More and more aging people want their retirement years to be a time of growth, intellectually, emotionally, and spiritually. Elders, quotes, ripen into wisdom and mellow into caring and compassion. Oldsters see their lives as behind them, reveling only in what they have already done and accomplished. Elders see their lives as enriched and enriching right to the end. Well, I began my own journey with conscious eldering in 1995 when I was 51 years old. You can do the math. And serving as the ministerial intern at Mount Diablo UU Church in Walnut Creek. And the first individuals I met there, due to the fact that Rossmore is right next door, right? The first individuals I met there were old people. And they were people in their 70s and 80s. And they opened the doors of their lives to me, revealing their wrenching encounter with the dilemma of growing old in our throwaway culture. Their stories painfully expose that culture, a culture in which we discard anything that shows wear, that is not new and not stylish, that does not meet the distorted, profit-driven vision of perfect, ageless bodies, shiny lives. A culture that perpetuates consumption of products heavily laden with distorted sex appeal that are supposed to guarantee us success and the good life. These elders complained that their growing physical limitations prevented them from living the lives that they used to live, to take on the tasks, particularly of the work for justice, that had been so very important to them in their younger lives. And their stories touched me deeply. They seared my own sense of justice, and they stirred my desire to create an opportunity for them to find a way through their dissatisfaction and pain. And it was then that I discovered the Jung quote. And it was in an anthology of literature on growing old. And I want to read it again. A human being would certainly not grow to be 70 or 80 years old, or 90, if this longevity had no meaning for the species to which they belong. That is a profound statement. And I knew it was true, even at 51. And while it's taken me years to realize even a portion of the vast, complex, and rich implications of these words, I did know, as soon as I read them, that they held a vision that ran powerfully counter to the cultural narrative that was so debilitating to those older people. A narrative that they struggled with because it had taken up residence inside themselves. It was called and is called ageism. Internalized ageism. And we are all afflicted with it. All of us, no matter what our age. From the launch point then of that Jungian quote and the corrective power of its insight, we created a regular gathering that we call the Elder Journey. And I'm happy to say that that Elder Journey group still exists at Mount Diablo. Every year they have an intern, and the intern takes up the mantle of hosting that class for the elders in that community. Well, that gathering of folks, and we met every week for several months, that gathering of folks opened a door for me into the ravages of ageism and into the power of conscious elder community. And these are the two dynamics that I want to explicitly name in this sermon because they are central to the development of a lasting experience of conscious eldering. Challenging ageism and creating conscious elder community. So here I think it's a good idea to offer a definition. Conscious eldering is an age-specific journey in which an individual in their older years, 60s and on, begins to engage their own aging process. To engage it. Not to be the victim of it. To engage it. To do that with intention, with openness, with compassion and dedication, in order to tap the developmental processes that come unbidden to them and to us as we move out of middle age and out of the identity of the mature adulthood that we have been invested in. Let me go over that again. Conscious eldering is an age-specific journey in which an individual in their older years, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, begins to engage their own aging process, and to do so with intention, with openness, compassion, and dedication, in order to tap the developmental processes that come unbidden to them, to us, as they move out of middle age and into, and out of, rather, the identity of this mature adulthood that we have so much invested in, is shifting now. See, the understanding here and the insight here is that there are developmental stages that are just as discrete and just as important in our 60s, 70s, 80s as it is for my 9-month-old grandbaby. And I'm watching that change. I go down once a month to LA to spend a week with him, and I'm watching, so I get to see these leaps every month. Well, guess what? I'm experiencing leaps. I'm experiencing leaps internally that are unbidden. I'm not trying to make them happen, they're happening. So that's an important insight, I believe, and one that we need to think deeply about and spend time with. So what does it mean then? A little bit more about this age-specific journey. So it arrives when we come to these advanced years. But what happens in conscious eldering is that the person then begins to make a decision. And the decision is, and it may not be conscious at first, but it begins to arise. The person makes a decision to engage their life, to engage their aging. An intention is to learn, is to be open to the natural unfolding of the critical psychological and spiritual and existential capacities that had not been available to us at younger age. Dynamics, capacities, processes come unbidden, and they lead the older person to abandon significant elements of what they believed was their mature adult identity. They begin to abandon themselves, in fact, in order to let a radical shift work its way with them, a shift that will bear forward a deeper and more highly unique dimension of self. Many of us begin to believe that we can be more ourselves now than we've ever been before. So I want to speak specifically about what this journey is leading through and into for me, and what other elders that I share community with believe. And what I think may be universal, at least universal to this culture in North America. That's who we are. And with all of the mix that we have here in North America. But in the last year or so, I've begun to have insights into my own personal patterns in my life, the way I've been living my life, and certain patterns. You know how we do that. And I've had deeper insight into how I behave. But the deal is that they're far more powerful than they've ever been before. I can see them more clearly now than I could see them even just 10 years ago. All of a sudden, I see what I'm doing with a particular pattern of behavior. And I'm a person with a lot of spiritual practice, a lot of groups, a lot of counseling, a lot of retreat work under my belt, and these things have been coming to me. That insight came to me, that deepening came to me without me doing anything. It just started happening. But it isn't hooked into any practice then. See, it's not because I'm meditating on it, not because I'm trying to increase my insight, but it seems rather to be rising out of this deep well of an evolving life force. And that's another part of the message that I'm trying to offer to you here. Something is going on internally in terms of life with a capital L that is moving me to this developmental process. So that's why the Jung quote makes sense on the internal sense, that there's something going on in here that brings us into an encounter with a culture that's awake and alive and needs to be expressed and needs to be felt. Another thing that I'm discovering, that we're discovering, is that from a lifetime of experience, we readily and more easily maintain a paradoxical consciousness. That is, I can hold a yes and a no together now more easily than I ever have before, right? And it's not just because I've been there. Oh man, I did that, I saw that. Back 25 years ago, our company I was in, or a group I was in, or a church I was in, we tried that, didn't work. Okay, over here we tried that, it did work. I've seen both of those, and how this church is trying to consider this thing, and I'm sitting at the table and I'm going, well, you know, let's hold the whole thing and let's discuss it from that point of view, holding it all. And that capacity seems to be increasing in me. But I don't think it's just because I have all this life experience. I actually experience this as a shift in consciousness. It's not just an iteration of I know more now. Something's shifting in my capacity to hold it. Another thing that's going on is that my reverence for, my gratitude for life, for my fellow humans, certainly for children, for the very earth itself, it comes more easily and deeply for me, my gratitude and my reverence. Wendell Berry's quote comes to mind, you know. He said, "Be joyful, though you have considered the facts. Be joyful, even though you have considered the facts." So despite my deep despair over the terrible losses that hit our communities, particularly frontline communities in this country, that is particularly communities of color, despite this despair over the decimation of species, the radicalizing climate systems, despite my intense awareness and pain about all of that, I have a deeper gratitude for life and a joy with life than I've had before. This mysterious and amazing journey we're on. Truly mysterious, truly amazing. Another thing that I am finding, is that I am simply less concerned with what others think about me. Actually, that's not true. I'm less concerned about what I think others are thinking about me. Because that's where it is, right? I'm carrying it around in here, but I'm letting that go more. It's just like, let it go. It's not important. It's just not important. But it used to be so important. But some shift is happening. Some shift is happening, and it's a shift that I had no conscious hand in summoning. And that word summoning is important at this point because it reminds me that my elder years also bring a more internally located sense of engagement with the critical issues of our times. I'm not less concerned about them, I'm more concerned about them. Even as my commitment for supporting the movement for Black lives remains strong and is in fact central to my sense of duty that I feel emboldened by, empowered by, and nurtured by, I find that my passion has an inner cast to it. Something's gone internally in me in my capacity to see and hold these issues and difficulties. And it seems to be calling me through some process. It's more internal than ever before. And what it also helps me to do is to brush my anxiety aside. I'm less anxious about stuff. You know, I could just put it aside. I'm more anxious about some things, but mostly I'm less anxious. In order to fully claim this elderhood that I'm talking about, I believe that we come to recognize that we need to make conscious our own internalized ageism. And that's why it's important to have a dialogical community for elders, to talk about the effects and the experience of ageism. Just like women needed to be together during the women's movement and still do, just like people of color need to be together to separate from white folks, just like white folks need to be together to be able to talk about what they are actually doing that they want to take responsibility for, elders need to do the same thing, to be able to look into and see what we share and what's going on in terms of the effects of ageism in our lives. Because nobody else knows what the effects are internally the way we do, because we're experiencing it. So dealing with ageism is one of the critical requirements for this time. Another power of becoming conscious in elderhood is a greater capacity to face into the unknown. And there's a poem by Rumi that has a stanza in it that Lucky actually rewrote, and he wrote it this way. This is how it goes. Meaning. Meaning pass quickly through your being into absence, unknowing, and emptiness. The story of your name and fame secures you a new knot every moment. Personal identity is a sheath. Personal identity is a sheath. It's an outer covering. It's where the blade, the critical part of who I am, is held. But it isn't the critical part of who I am, the personal identity. This is what he's saying. What he says is the unique one resides within. Reality unites worn covering with our mysterious and unencumbered nature. Meaning pass quickly through your being into absence, unknowing, and emptiness. Opening to these years with intention echoes what some Zen practitioners describe as facing into the unknown as a way of life. Because the fact is, we don't know what's going to happen next. We never know. Never. But accepting that and internalizing that and taking that in as a way to guide my life is a powerful instrument for being effective and being present in the world. Because otherwise, what we're functioning on is what we predict is going to happen. And how often have we been wrong? Well, let's see. 2 minutes ago? 10 minutes. And the last thing, no exploration of conscious eldering would be complete without lifting up the presence and the function of death in the life of elders. For aging people, this death creates a radical terminus and in some respects an end to everything, no matter what our theology or belief. For the intentional elder, however, death is a life giver, a radical and necessary authoritativeness that transforms their participation in reality into a new potency and transfigures time into acute aliveness, the aliveness of the present. So conscious eldering is an evolutionary process. And it's an evolutionary process that only a few have known over time in history. It's been a limited field because people just didn't live as long as we are now living. We have this capacity now, these extra decades. And there also wasn't a community of elders to dialogue with. Now with greater numbers, there's a capacity to come together in community. So we're entering this new time. It's an incredibly new time. And a time in which rich and rewarding consciousness is opening for we older people who have the desire and the attention to fulfill the deep impulses of life, driving an evolutionary moment that we have never before known. Now, if you want purpose as an elder, there it is. We are on the forming edge of humanity. We are on the forming edge. How can we live that out? What can we do to live that out? And what we're arguing is that there's all kinds of possibilities for living that out. They may not look like what other people are doing, but we have all kinds of possibilities. They may not look like anything that we've thought before about what we could do as an older person, but there are all kinds of possibilities. But we need to be engaged in conversation together in order to assess those things out and make them available and possible for ourselves. So that's what I'm here to do, is to stir that up and hope that maybe you'll get that started. Because everywhere I go and preach this thing, it just turns out that after I leave, they start an elder journey group. Interesting. So, this rich time that we're entering, this time never before known, may each of us, older or younger, experience the joy of that journey. Because you see, we're all in this together, no matter what age we are. We're all in that together. Because we're all going to get older. Some of us are older now, and we're joined together in this community. And you particularly have this opportunity because here you are in a special community that you've created for yourselves. Great. Good. Ashe Amen. Blessed be.